Welcome to the final keynote session of the afternoon, talking about the future of unified communications, obviously a major topic. My name is Chris Middleton. I'm the co-editor of UC Insight, which is the sister editorial publication that goes with this event. I'm also an editor and journalist for a number of other things. If you want to find out about me, go to chrismiddleton.company. It's not compulsory, however, and I won't hold it against you. The last panel I hosted wasn't at this event. It was with 3 astronauts and a woman who's going to run the London Marathon while Tim Peake runs it in space, and a woman who's launching a spaceport in Sweden and is going to be an astronaut. So I can't lie to you, gentlemen. You've got to go somewhere to to really bring up the debate to to that kind of level. Same goes for the audience, actually. We're going to be opening it up to questions from the audience fairly quickly. The first person who asked a question at that particular panel was an economist in Bristol who's building a starship. So please do think of some questions to compete with that. The first thing to say is that our speaker from Avaya today, Steve, is unfortunately not able to make it, so we're down one panel member. So apologies for that, and apologies on his behalf. And without further ado, let's get each of our panel members in turn to introduce themselves just with their job title and say a little bit about what you do for your company. First, Don.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So my name is Donald McLaughlin. I lead the collaboration business for Cisco in the UK and Ireland, and we're fortunate that collaboration for us is a fairly extensive portfolio these days. Obviously, it includes some of the well-known brands like WebEx for web conferencing, but also includes obviously the video conferencing portfolio, which obviously includes the Tandberg acquisition, and also includes all of the traditional unified communication stuff, as well as contact center as well. So we're a pretty busy team, but delighted to be here and looking forward to the chat.
Okay.
I'm Peter Quinlan. I have not been to outer space. I'm from Singapore, where I am the Vice President of Unified Communications and Collaboration Product Management for Tata Communications. Tata is part of the, as you guys will know, the Tata Group, one of the leading global conglomerates. And for us, collaboration includes SIP trunking services, which work across the spectrum of UC&C on a global basis, as well as a complete suite of solutions and services from both our friends at Cisco and our friends at Microsoft, with a complete managed service wrapper around them.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Andrew Sinclair. I'm the General Manager for Skype and Skype for Business, which means I span both consumer and the enterprise business, so representing and working with hundreds of millions of users. We did put Skype on the International Space Station, so I can get you there as part of the HoloLens. So if you go to the NASA site, you can see that. But I have no intention of ever going to space.
Okay, perhaps we could take a quick straw poll from the audience. Could you put up your hands if you would say your job title is primarily business focused? Okay, thank you. And then if you could say if your job title is primarily to do with technology strategy, tech implementation within the company. That's interesting. It's a slight tech focus, but actually quite a lot of business people here. So that gives us some steer towards how we construct the discussion today. Sure. I was having a conversation with somebody immediately before this panel and asking him how the event had gone for him. And he was saying that there was no clear message to come out of the event so far. There's been a lot of discussion about a lot of individual topics, security, millennials, which we hear about all the time, and so on. We'll touch on some of those things. But he was saying there's no real sort of dominant theme. So I thought this is a good opportunity, company by company, to say, if you each just set out your stall, as it were, to say what you would say is your key message for the future, both in the short term, over the next year to 2 years, and perhaps over 5 years ahead. What are the key things for you? Don?
Yeah, so I would say that the key message for us this year is about collaboration's ability to underpin the wider digitization or digital transformation that we're seeing within the industry at the moment. And just to be clear, for us, digitization is about bringing together people, data, and devices to drive improvements in mobility and efficiency. So it's a fairly broad area, but we certainly feel that collaboration has a fundamental role to play in helping drive that digital transformation in the world today. And that's not just for companies, it's for countries as well. So it's a fairly lofty ambition. But I think some of the research is interesting. There was a professor at Yale, a guy called Richard Foster, who has said that if we look at the S&P 500 and actually took a snapshot of it in 2011, by 2027, 75% of those companies will have changed, which is a pretty scary prospect if you're one of the current members of the S&P 500. And there's other research which has indicated that within 10 years, 40% of companies will have disappeared. So it's not a nice to have. I think the term we're using is disrupt or be disrupted, and I think that's a good way of putting it. I do it to yourself before somebody does it to you, and I think we can all remember Kodak, Blockbuster Video companies who I guess sadly missed what was happening in the market, and I think we've seen a number of other more recent examples with the likes of Uber and Airbnb, and who would have thought the biggest hotel company in the world wouldn't own any hotels.
Sure.
So it's a key role for collaboration to play in driving that transformation, and we're obviously very excited about that.
Peter, Microsoft itself has faced a lot of disruption in recent years. You could say that it's been playing catch up to some degree in the mobile space. Perhaps in previous years it lost ground to competitors in that space. So what are the key future sort of themes for you?
So from a Tata perspective, I guess
I apologise for Tata. Yeah.
We're essentially in a space where along the lines of the previous comments, pretty much everything out there is in a state of flux at the moment, and the things that we take for granted tomorrow are the things that are novel and new today. I mean, you think about whether it's smartphones or Airbnb, that booking your. I'm old enough to remember when people would debate whether Salesforce.com would take off, because I don't know if I want to put my sales data on a software as a service platform I don't control. So a lot of the challenges that sort of seem to be binding us today as people worry about legacy infrastructure and integrating these disparate silos within the enterprise, those will evaporate pretty quickly. And I think the pace at which we see technological change and disruption happening now is really faster than it has ever been, and it's only going to get faster. And we're almost in a once-in-a-career moment to see all these different disparate technologies being disrupted and coming together in the communication space. For us, from a business and an end-user perspective, we view that as creating both challenge and opportunity. The challenge, obviously, is how do you assimilate this and help your users make that journey, but also how do you get your arms around the opportunity, because once you embrace that change and start moving towards the unified communications and collaboration capability with a user experience for your end user, the faster and better things get. Fortunately, I guess the key message for us is there's a lot of options that people have today. They're not in this alone. I think it would almost be, 5 years from now, it will seem almost madness that folks would try to solve these sorts of challenges at an enterprise level using expertise they have inside the organization. So there's a little bit of a shift in a mindset that's going to happen as people embrace the cloud, as people work with the vendor solutions out there and work with service providers like us to say, how do I get my arms around the capability as fast as possible, and I don't need to try to manage all that in-house anymore, and there's a lot of different ways that I can do that to drive the transformation more quickly.
Okay, and again, apologies for reading across two questions I had on my laptop screen. Guess what I'm going to ask you next. But Peter, sticking with you, with Tata, which is a huge, as you say, multinational conglomerate with a lot of different interests, how big a challenge is it for you within the communications bit of the company to put across a single vision, a strong brand message? People will understand what Tata is about from the communications and UC standpoint.
Well, we're a challenger in virtually every market outside of our home market in India. I think so it is a little bit of a challenge walking into new markets where folks may not have dealt with us for their domestic requirements. What we're finding, though, again, with the dynamics changing, with cloud becoming not just acceptable, but almost the preferred delivery model for many organizations, and our ability to execute on cloud solutions globally with the carrier-grade reliability really stands to our advantage. And so we're not really bound by the constraints or legacy infrastructure that many of the providers today have. We can actually when we talk about implementing global applications, whether it's a hosted Skype for Business or whether it's a Cisco collaboration, we do that on a carrier-grade backbone that spans the world, and we think in global terms. So we're not talking country-by-country solutions. Our SIP trunking offering is a uniform global offering with one SLA, one price structure, and global reach. So we think in those terms. We think like a cloud company in every market that we go into. In a legacy world, that's a bit of an impediment because you're not down in the trenches in the local market, so to speak, but it does allow you to come in over the top and do some very unique things for organizations, especially as they look outside of their own marketplace or they become more global or more regional.
Okay, Andrew, as you know, I mentioned that Microsoft's playing catch-up to some degree in quite big areas of its business, but dealing specifically with Skype and Skype for Business. What are the big themes for you over the next 2 years sort of time scale, and maybe then 5 years ahead in terms of where the future of the industry is going for our audience, which, as you know, is evenly split between business and IT and business strategists? Yeah.
Well, building on the things that Donald and Peter said, we really have a key message, and that is the cloud happened. It's no longer a case of people taking point solutions and moving to the cloud. The wave that people will be riding in the next 5 years, and the wave that Microsoft is riding, and in many cases leading in the next 5 years, is moving the entire collaboration suite into the cloud. And these days, there are very few reasons why anybody would install anything on premises. You can get everything from your word processor, through your business intelligence solution, through your meeting and PSTN solution, and even your dial tone you can get from the cloud today. And we're seeing a lot of momentum in that. And I spoke this morning in one of the keynotes about how that momentum is driving business transformation. And we're seeing the new wave of companies, or companies that are transforming themselves, really attaching to that. And they're driving their business value, they're driving their differentiation, because they're allowed, or they're able, to focus on what their core business is, not on infrastructure.
Are you finding, given that in recent years Microsoft has undeniably lost ground in some spaces, in terms of what happened with mobiles and the smartphone revolution, and Microsoft was very much seen as playing catch-up in that space to some degree. How difficult has it been for you as an organization to convince the user base in a very broad sense that you have a strong mobile message as well as a strong cloud message? Because obviously Microsoft has built a very strong presence as an enterprise cloud enabler for people.
Well, I don't think we actually have to convince anybody of anything. We just show them. Microsoft, the idea that Microsoft is behind in mobile is a couple of years old. And it's kind of telling that you're talking to the guy who is straddling consumer and enterprise today. Because we have, across the product range, on every product, we are on every platform that our partners are on, or our customers are on. So, while Skype came into Microsoft riding a wave of being on almost 27 different platforms, including baby monitors, we've seen the rest of the business deliver first-class experiences across all of those platforms. So you'll see equally strong applications on iOS or Android as you do on Windows today. And Microsoft really is, as a company, very much a mobile-first company these days, which is why you're seeing so many applications landing on mobile.
Do we, this is for everyone really, we talk about the cloud an awful lot. We have been talking about the cloud perhaps for 10 years, to such a degree that we think of it in terms of being this sort of fog of code that somehow unifies everybody. Really, the cloud is about data centers built on land, renting space in data centers, and those data centers are built under national laws, and people are now building data centers in every part of the world. Do businesses think enough about that, and is the terminology we use about the cloud slightly sort of leading people into a false sense of security, if you like? It's a very broad question, I know, but do people think enough about hosting their data and hosting their applications, overseas in vast data centers. Should we perhaps not just say, rather than my data's in the cloud, and say the reality was that my data's in a data warehouse in Wisconsin? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, well, firstly, I think customers and businesses think a lot about the cloud and the implications of the cloud, and I think intuitively businesses absolutely realise that is the way to go, and will be the way the industry goes for an awful long time to come. So I think people understand that there's some security considerations, some pretty significant security considerations, and I think there's an obligation on all of the cloud providers to make sure that we address those and recognise them and build our products to cater for that. But I think that whole idea that businesses now are at the stage where I think everybody realises that's where they're going to go. But people do it at different rates, and for example, the analogy I would use is I know I should probably lose some weight and do a bit more exercise, and I might make a decision to do that, but it doesn't mean I can run a marathon tomorrow. I need to obviously plan it. I need to understand what I need to do to get there, and it's a great ambition to have. But different people will do it at different rates. So I think businesses are the same, and I think our the obligation we have as a large IT company is to make sure that we protect people's investment, but give them a journey to get there, and make sure that we make that as smooth as possible for them.
Peter, what's Tata's view on this in general terms? It's not just about security, but also about where data is hosted, under what laws and things. So you operate internationally. So how many of the conversations you have fall into this sort of space in terms of, how important is it to IT decision makers in particular?
Well, it's hugely important, and it as the regulatory environment emerges country by country, it becomes even more important. So I guess a couple key points would be, one is to really think about, I guess, to the comment you made earlier, it takes a lot of heavy infrastructure to keep the cloud afloat. Mm-hmm. It is cables, it's servers, it's data centers. We have this, you see it made fun of in Hollywood movies. What's the cloud? What's the cloud? Well, it's actually a lot of technological infrastructure that's pretty complicated. Yeah. Enterprises think a lot about it, but ultimately they're going to need to look for partners and people who can deliver and help them address those challenges, because it's not something you're going to build on your own. And what we've done from a Tata perspective is, we've been in the telco game for decades. We operate probably among the world's largest cable footprints in the world. We operate 44 data centers around the world. So when we talk about building an application fabric, we build a global cloud application fabric, and where regulatory requirements or customer privacy or policy requirements demand, we'll put servers locally. But you also have to think about how that, especially when you talk about real-time collaboration, how that collaboration experience is going to perform. So we also look at how those data centers are connected to the major applications like Skype for Business or Cisco Spark. We bring those applications on net, and we look at how the data is managed and how the collaboration traffic is managed. We also look off-net. We're probably one of the world's largest IP transit providers in the world, carrying about 20% of the world's internet traffic. So we'll look at how UC traffic peers with other ISPs. Even if it's free over the internet, we're looking at how that gets managed. And so as organizations start to get into this game and look at how they do that, they definitely need help, and they do need to think not just about a regulatory perspective, but if they are going to capture the return on their investment in collaboration, how do the applications perform? And does it give a suitable user experience on a global basis, both inside as well as outside the company? And so those are the kind of challenges we help people to address. And as I said earlier, it's not probably something you want to try to address as an enterprise on a standalone basis, because you're increasingly connected into a global economy, supplier ecosystem, customer ecosystem, and you've got partners and you've got cloud applications to help you do it.
Yeah. Andrew, there are differences now, between Europe as a bloc, if you like, and the US in terms of our attitude to data hosting, transparency, data transfer, security, all of that complex mix of things. There are also differences, as we know, to some degree, between the UK and Europe in terms of the continental infrastructure, if you like, and attitude. How does this have any impact on your dealings with clients? This sort of difference in terms of the culture between the US Europe and even the UK and Europe?
Absolutely, this is a critical question. And it's, the cloud has reached a level of maturity where everybody has to really think about data sovereignty, they have to think about security, they have to think about privacy. And for smaller companies, that's a real challenge. Now, the way that we help is by building that into the infrastructure. So compliance, as I like to joke, the alphabet soup of compliance, making sure that we have data centers in the right place, and really giving our customers the ability to host their data and to locate their platform wherever it is. And it's not just our collaboration suite that does this, across Azure suite. So as companies are building their own applications on Azure, you still have to think about compliance, data sovereignty, privacy, security. And these things really have to be part of the strategy and part of the culture of the company. And luckily, we've reached a level of maturity where we can help, and other partners and competitors can help companies get to that level of maturity. You can't ignore it anymore.
Okay, one of the discussions earlier today was about that UC is very much to do with the total user experience, if you like, in terms of, a lot of large organizations will have their own private networks and will have perhaps and have quality of service attached with that, and so they will get a very high quality experience, we assume in general terms, from their UC. But then, when people move out into the mobile workforce or working from home, working flexibly, the experience may be very different from using the same or similar tools. So how big a problem is that in terms of managing the mix between sort of the consumer end that people are using out and about via their own devices or mobile devices, and managing it within the enterprise? Is there any tension there? People expect the same level of experience and quality across all of these different channels?
They do, and there are a lot of solutions here. Firstly, the best internet connection you'll ever get is in Starbucks. We should just, make sure everybody understands that. But you're right. There are a lot of differences between consumer networks and enterprise networks. In the enterprise networks, there's obviously more control. We have partners who are helping us deliver things like ExpressRoute, so that they can have quality of service there. But you also have to build your software so that it will adapt to the consumer networks, to the great unregulated internet. And this is where the experience we have on our consumer side is super valuable, because if you think about it, with hundreds of millions of users, we have probes on every single byroad and blind alley on the internet. So we know what it takes to get from Burkina Faso to Redmond, for instance, and we know what characteristics are. We know where jitter is being injected into the network. We know where the delays are, and we can route appropriately. And you just have to build up that intelligence to make it work. And obviously years and years of experience of working in unfavorable networks translates into building great solutions in the enterprise and building real high quality networks.
Peter, what's Tata's view on this? To what extent is UC in the future going to be about raising the lowest common denominator, if you like, rather than always focusing on sort of the high-end excellence?
So I definitely agree with the comments just made, that as people put increasingly important collaboration onto these applications, the standard is just going to need to be raised. I mean, you think about it, Skype calling or Skype video calling in the consumer realm from days back was always fine as long as you could fall back to a regular telephone line. Now, you can't really do that if that's your primary enterprise communication device. And Skype has come a long way since the early consumer days. What we find, we're part and parcel of the fabric of the internet as well as the telecommunications infrastructure. We're carrying 50 billion voice wholesale minutes between carriers every year. We carry, as I mentioned, 20% of the world's internet traffic on our backbone. So these kind of challenges, how you facilitate that application, how you get the visibility into what's going on to deliver that experience, we spend a lot of time on. And as we work on we're fortunate to partner with the leading application providers who really work on user experience, and we focus on how do we facilitate the kind of collaboration experience or the quality of service that's going to be required to support a variety of business needs. And I do think you'll find, as we go forward, you'll find different classes of service and even potentially different charge models for the level of quality that people want, whether it's free over the top or sponsored data, or whether it's actually an enterprise communications network. There will be different layers or different qualities of service that people will want to see. So you'll see that start to segregate a bit and to pan out. But it's definitely a huge area to look at. And to your, I guess, final point would be, I think the standard is really being driven by consumers who bring their own device and want to choose the application that works best for their particular requirement at the moment. How do you make them all work together, and how do you make them perform adequately is what we focus on.
Don, what's Cisco's attitude to this? I mean, obviously Cisco's huge in networking and infrastructure, so how do you approach this particular argument?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that user experience is absolutely critical. In fact, everything we build now is based on user experience first, and recognizing that if we're going to make collaboration pervasive and allow companies and countries to get the kind of potential productivity benefits that we can drive through collaboration, then it has to be an experience that people will want to use. So I agree that the consumer market has helped drive that, and I think that's been a really positive bit of disruption. I mean, why on earth would somebody get a less good experience at work than they would in their personal life? It doesn't make sense. And what you'll actually see is that a lot of the business applications now will start to look and feel a lot more like the consumer applications that people have grown up with. So I think that's absolutely key. And I come back to the point that if we're going to unlock the potential that collaboration has in driving productivity and efficiency within the kind of wider economy, then it has to be driven by experience. But the point about public networks versus private networks, if you will, if that's a good way to compare it, there's a good reason that businesses have made significant long-term investments in building a robust foundational infrastructure, because that gives them the flexibility to take their business in different directions, to take advantage of new applications when they come out. And there's a good reason they've made that investment, because the public internet by its very nature is not really as reliable or predictable as your own network might be. But I think it's clearly improving, and there are the devices are intelligent enough to make the best of the quality of bandwidth or connection that they have. So that's another bit of progress. But I think we'll continue to see businesses make significant investments in a strong, robust, secure, scalable infrastructure.
Outside of the sort of the private networks, the world of private networks where businesses pay to have, world-class infrastructure put in. Yeah. Are there any instances where the UK's national infrastructure, if you like, is putting a brake on UC's ability to expand? I just want to share a very brief anecdote of my own dealing with BT. They said it wasn't in their commercial interests to upgrade the local infrastructure where I was, because they can make more money by forcing businesses to pay for a private installation rather than actually just upgrading the sort of the local node, as it were, sort of in one of the UK's digital centres. Yeah. In Brighton, where I live. They said it just wasn't in their interest to upgrade it. So is that a problem for the UK, that our national infrastructure is in some instances letting down this emerging culture of the cloud and collaboration and video, the rest of it, outside of corporate enterprise world?
Yeah, it's a hugely important area, and governments have a big responsibility to make sure that where there's market failure, if you will, where the numbers don't add up for the big service providers, then they have a responsibility to make the investment, really from the point of view of inclusion, because if we are, as I say, going to make this pervasive and make everybody, or give everybody the same opportunity to benefit from it, then it needs to be available to everybody, and therefore, if you live in an area that hasn't got a good broadband service, then that's putting you at an unnecessary disadvantage. So I would agree, I think governments need to take a stake in that, because at the end of the day, it's something that's going to impact GDP, so it's not something they can step back from. And as I say, in remote areas, and you can probably tell by the accent that I come from north of the border, there's lots of big open spaces there that don't have the same density of population, and the government's actually taking some steps to make sure that we can create a much more inclusive society when it comes to connectivity.
Talking in general terms about collaboration, which we're always hearing is the sort of the key emerging hotspot in unified communications at the moment, such that we now call it UC&C, unified communications and collaboration. How much of that is about a cultural change within user organizations, approaching it from a business strategy standpoint rather than a technology problem? Peter?
I would definitely say you have to start, we try to encourage our salespeople and indeed our customers to really start outside in. Generally when we produce a product or a solution that doesn't get acceptance, it's because we've done it inside out, starting with technology and not really what is the user experience, what is the business need you're trying to deliver, and form has to therefore follow function. And so I think that's hugely critical in looking at how you design and how you roll out services, and it's incredibly important to adoption. I think the good news is users have a lot of options available to them, and I think those, again, the pace of disruption, the pace of change in a world that's increasingly a software-driven world is astoundingly fast. So you drive out those inefficiencies or those disconnects between what users want and what they're getting pretty quickly, because they'll go out and find an app that does what they want if you're not giving it to them. So I think you'll see that only get faster and user experience get better and better and better. I think there is still scope for interoperability between some of the consumer platforms that users are choosing and some of the enterprise platforms that people bring on, but I think that will also fall by the by relatively quickly, probably more quickly than we think it might happen today.
Andrew, how big is the role for vendors in educating clients, organizations, enterprises, businesses of every size in the business advantages in collaboration rather than the technology focus that a lot of vendors obviously have?
I think it's critical. And actually, a lot of customers are educating the vendors on how important it is. And we're seeing, businesses are very smart. Businesses know that they are moving into a very agile, very dynamic, very networked environment. They have a workforce that is coming in who are extremely technically savvy. A workforce that didn't know a world where you couldn't video conference, for instance. And if you can think about it, video conferencing 13 years ago was magic. Today it's commonplace. It's on every device you carry. You can hardly buy a phone or a PC that doesn't have a camera. So the workforce is super well educated. Businesses know that they have to transform, and they see a huge amount of opportunity. Having said that, vendors are critical in getting people there. A lot of businesses, as they go through the digital transformation that you were talking about earlier, they need guidance. You don't just go home on a Friday with one infrastructure and wake up on a Monday with a new infrastructure. So vendors and our partners and the SIs out there do play a very critical role in helping people manage to get to the modern workplace, as we call it, or get through digital transformation. But I think businesses know it.
Yeah. You were talking about video. Do we focus perhaps too much on video, and are we focusing on it too much in the future? What I mean is that although we know that a lot of, the vast amount of new traffic via mobiles, for example, is video, but that's partly just down to the size of the data involved. Are we focusing too much on video, though, when really we ought to be focusing more on document exchange, real-time updating documents and, that type of collaborative workflow, rather than just focusing on getting a good video image of a...
It's a fair point. And document collaboration, screen sharing, all of the other things that you do when collaborate, even inking, the ability to ink remotely with somebody. And we talk about this sort of sexy device we have, the Surface Hub, which allows the huddle type scenario where teams collaborate and create together on a pen and touch device. So even inking collaboratively, it's all about shrinking distance and allowing teams wherever they are to work close together. Having said that, video is very critical because it changes the dynamics between teams. When you, even going from narrowband audio to wideband audio changes the dynamics. But when you can look somebody in the eye when you're talking to them and build that trust with them, you build much better performing teams. And just to sort of put a number on that, when you look at our traffic, which is like 3 billion minutes a day, 46% of that is video. People are doing a lot of video because it's so important to them to build that connection, to look people in the eye, build trust, build the team.
Okay.
I would say focusing on any one aspect of the technology too much is probably wrong. I think there's a huge amount of work yet to be done on integrating collaboration into workflows and business requirements. We do a lot of work on the API and SDK wrapper of the services that we do that allow people to integrate collaboration into a workflow. And that may be something as simple as, I walk outside the restaurant and someone's hit my car. I want to place a call to my insurance agent. Now that insurance agent can run an application that lets him see through my camera, take a picture or a video of the damage, upload that into a claim, use location-based services to help in authentication and fraud prevention, and immediately the claim is processed, and I've eliminated inspector visits, I've reduced transaction time. So yeah, video is a part of that, but I didn't talk about video. I'm talking about a business need and how do I add value to a business process, which makes a difference to a consumer as well as to a business. So I think that's where there's a huge amount of work yet to be done for all of us, and we don't really try to guess what our end customers or our business customers are going to want. We show them the technology, and you can almost see the wheels start turning. It was like in the early days of telepresence. You showed somebody, and suddenly they're like, oh, if I had this, here's all the things I could do with it. And suddenly they're going to tell you how to apply it to their business need. You almost just need to listen and to make your applications and your services as flexible as possible to be able to accommodate what they're going to tell you, because they know intuitively what they want to do to make their business better, their customer experience better. That's where I think there's a whole lot of work to be done, and that's not a technology conversation, that's a business and an end user conversation.
Don, are we focusing too much on improving video quality and enabling video in organizations where perhaps they really want to collaborate in other ways? And, is that an issue, do you think?
No, I think we should continue to focus on the areas that provide most value. The feedback we get from customers is that they actually don't really want UC applications. They want business applications that have UC embedded in them, and that's where a lot of the effort is going in. So a lot of the tools now have a much more natural feel to them. Video can add a massive amount of value in many cases. But it's about understanding the way people want to work and the way they would naturally work to the kind of optimum way. And coming back to your cultural question, which I asked a few moments ago, what we're seeing now is that companies differentiate themselves much more on customer service than they ever did, or the customer experience is probably a better term. And I think Gartner noted that this year 9 out of 10 companies have actually got a customer experience measure, which they're relying on. So this whole thing about understanding the most expensive resource that any company has is their people, and understanding how they can make things better for their employees, how they can improve employee engagement. Because at the end of the day, a company is only as good as the people who represent it. And if you're going to measure yourself on customer experience or customer service, then it's about how motivated and engaged your employee base is. And that probably brings us on to our next chapter, which you mentioned millennials at the beginning, and maybe we can start to touch on that, because the proportion of the workforce is changing pretty rapidly now in terms of the generational side of it. But yeah, coming back to the point, that understanding how your company works and how your people can best represent your company is a really key area.
That was going to be my next question. We hear a lot about millennials, digital natives and things, but really, in a sense, we're all millennials now. We're all digital natives because we all use technology in broadly the same way. We might use email a bit more than a teenager does, or somebody who's just emerging into the workforce now. And we may still use landlines. And teenagers, we know about 2% of teenagers use landlines or have ever used a landline. But what are the practical steps, therefore, that organisations, our business and technology audience here need to be thinking about for the next few years in terms of creating a sort of a core of business applications for the future that will enable them to compete and to collaborate and to attract and retain staff as well, which is another key issue, of course.
Yeah, I think the first thing that organisations have to do is listen, right? They have to listen to their employees. You might argue that the people in this room are fairly digitally familiar and are comfortable using the technology, but there's a significant mindset difference between, I guess, the Generation X and the millennials, and just in terms of the way they think and what they want from a job. I mean, there's examples where millennials or Generation Y would actually wouldn't worry too much about losing their wallet, but they'd worry a hell of a lot about losing their smartphone, because in terms of how important relatively those two are to them, it's a very different world. And they're also willing to take lower salaries for a better flexible working role within a company. And that's something that, to most people in the room, we'd probably be quite frightened of doing. So there's a big mindset change, and I think the first thing that companies have to do is make sure they're listening to the early in career people within their business and understanding the value that they can add to them going forward, because in 10 years' time, they will be the majority in terms of the workforce.
Peter, in terms of enabling this more collaborative, flexible workforce and work culture within organizations, what would you add to that in terms of the practical steps that IT managers, IT strategists, business strategists need to be thinking about in the next few years?
So I definitely agree with the point on listening and thinking about user experience first. I think there's also a large amount of work to do in terms of how do you replicate the kind of experience that millennials and even we all as consumers enjoy when we choose an application from the App Store, download it, get started, switch if we don't like it. How do you provide that, on demand or instantaneous, self-service, auto-provisioning, and enable independence? I mean, very few people enjoy calling up a bank and going through an IVR, waiting in a queue to talk to an agent. I mean, if I could get it done with an app by myself, I'd be much happier. And so changing that mindset in terms of how do you provide services to your internal users as well as to your customers, I think is going to be super critical. In the past, I think when we talk to our contact center customers, what we find is that the shift has gone from, I'm looking at how do I reduce transaction cost, to how do I transform the end-to-end experience for the consumer. And we do a lot of work with Cisco on, the multimodal contact center. And folks coming into a contact center and enjoying whether it's video chat, whatever mode of UC&C they want to enable the kind of interaction that they need. So really thinking about the form following the function and allowing the technology to serve whatever that business purpose is, but keeping in mind those principles of, having things on demand, having things flexible, having things self-service and consumable very easily to someone who's grown up in that culture is going to be super critical.
Andrew, the IT manager, the IT team leader, the communications manager, the CIO, all of these people, their role is very much at the sort of the nexus, if you like, of all of these shifting, cultural and technology changes. How difficult, is their role going to be in the years ahead to sort of balance this mix of, consumer experience, bring your own device, officially sanctioned IT within the business, what skills are they going to need in the future to sort of make all this happen for the enterprise?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are a number of things there in the question. Firstly, they really have to learn, and actually your business has to learn how to learn from customers. The extreme of this, which I like to quote, is don't do focus groups anymore. Learn how your customers behave. So you have to start building systems, you have to start building business process and products that have feedback loop built in, so you can learn exactly how users are actually using it rather than how they tell you they're going to use it, because they don't know. They don't know until they use it. So that's one aspect of it. You've really got to train and change your culture and your strategies and your business so you are learning from your customer all the time. And then from our point of view, we have to give them tools to make that comfortable. We have to give them the ability to learn from customers and be able to manage them, for instance. We do see a lot of apps being downloaded straight from the App Store today. All of the Skype for Business apps available in iTunes and the app stores, and users will download them themselves. But at the same time, we have to provide the tools such as when a user does log in from a bring your own device, we can flip the bit and encrypt the device so that business data is encrypted on there. So it's a combination of training your business and your IT to learn from customers, but also giving them the controls so that they can be comfortable with that and they can protect company data.
I'm just going to pick up on a point just before we open questions up to the floor, because it's the last keynote of the day, and I'm sure a lot of you have questions. You mentioned encryption. Encryption's a bit of a hot potato at the moment, isn't it? Because on the one hand, the UK government in particular seems to be very critical of encryption. It's worried about it. It's trying to push through its surveillance plans at the moment. Well, it is pushing them through.
Yeah.
But it's also clear that a lot of technology providers, while they're going along with it, they sort of have no choice but to do that, as we found from Apple's experience in the US. That it's clear that a lot of technology providers don't really agree with the fundamental aims of this surveillance culture. And at the same time, a lot of these companies are now pushing encrypted services. WhatsApp's now introduced end-to-end encryption. Google is pushing people towards encrypted email and services, and is even going to name and shame people who aren't encrypting communications. So we've got this strange tension between what the government wants to achieve and the IT community are sort of saying, oh yes, okay, we'll go along to that, along with that, but at the same time actually pushing a very different point of view. So in the centre of all of that is the user. So how difficult is that going to be in the months and years ahead for users navigating this minefield?
I think that one's going to be very difficult for everybody involved. It's going to be difficult for users, it's going to be difficult for the IT industry, and it's going to be difficult for government. And I don't have the answer. On the one hand, we want to be able to comply with government. We want to be able to protect users. So, for instance, online bullying. You don't want to allow that. You want to make sure that there are ways that people can be protected in that. But on the other hand, you don't want to open the data up to anybody. And I think we're just going to have to see how this plays out. There'll be a lot of consultation within the industry, with governments and with users, and we'll work out where the happy medium is. And I certainly don't know where it is. My hope is there is a solution that works for everybody out there, and we'll iterate our way towards it.
Okay, very diplomatic. Peter, do you have anything to add to this? Don?
Agree. It has yet to play out. I think we're at the early days of this, and we're raising whole new questions around the trade-offs between, shall you say, liberty or freedom and security. And that's inevitable in an organized society. I'm an American by birth. I live in Singapore. I compare their stances on gun control. They're very different. Both are nice places to live. You can set that needle in different places. And I think on that continuum, you will see societies making different decisions based on their own respective values and unique situations. I think the technology will need to be able to adapt. And I think we'll have a lot of bumps along the way, similar to what we had with the recent Apple encryption debate with the FBI. I think there's a lot of things that have yet to play out. That's probably common for any unique technological transition. We have to think through how do we want to govern these things and how do we want to integrate them into our laws and our society. And we have a hard time envisioning the use case, and we have an even harder time encapsulating the preferred position of the society into law. There's a lot of work to be done, and it will be challenging, but I think the good news is the technology is allowing us to do things in ways that we never before imagined. So the fact that we have to figure out how to put appropriate safeguards around that to protect society and law and order, I think is a good thing.
Don, a world in which technology has to be made less secure would be a bit of a nightmare for Cisco, wouldn't it, if this was just happening in one of its territories, perhaps?
Well, I think the good thing is that the technology is mature enough now that we'll find a way around pretty much all of these thorny issues over time. If you look back at the internet, for example, it's been used for a lot of good things, but there's been a few bad things that it's been used for. It doesn't mean the internet's not a good thing. It just means that we need to understand what potential pitfalls or issues there might be, and have a good dialogue with government, for example, in this particular issue, to make sure that we can try and get around it. So I think we're smart enough to find a solution as a world, and I think we will do. But it's about having a sensible dialogue to make sure that we get the balance right, because there's so many benefits to be gained from, for example, cloud-based deployments of technology, and we firmly believe that all of the breakthrough experiences of the future are going to come from the cloud, right? Because that's where all the innovation's taking place. That's where there's a very vibrant developer community in the world, and as I say, a lot of extremely smart people who will find a solution to these thorny problems, but it won't be the first time we've had to do it.
Sure. Well, quick observation from me. Thank you. TTIP is coming in possibly over the next few years. That would at least give vendors the opportunity to sue the UK government if they ever lose any business. So that'll be something to watch out for. Anyway, do we have any questions from the floor for our panel of experts? Gentleman there. There's a microphone coming over to you.
Hi, yeah, you can probably tell I work in the insurance industry, and Peter, that was a great point, by the way, because it's something we're exploring at the moment. But one of the things that I'm interested in is, are you getting inquiries or interest, should I say, from the automotive industry around how video or unified comms can come into the car as cars become more connected?
cars as sort of
Yeah.
Internet of Things devices. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So, as ever, I think there's some fantastic opportunities, particularly around IoT. There's examples of anti-collision technology and never mind solving insurance claims by providing evidence or something, but what about preventing accidents? And I think that's an even more exciting area to look at. Anything that can make things more more productive, make the claims process easier, make it better for the insured as well as the insurer, has to be a positive thing. And we're already seeing some great innovation in that area, particularly in the automotive industry. And I think we'll see an awful lot more to come.
Yeah, I would agree. We're seeing a lot. Obviously, we have an IoT platform. We're in cars today. I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity in both bringing cloud services through IoT, but also unified communication in cars. When you used an example earlier, which actually happened to me, I did dent the bumper on my car, and I went in, and it was amazing to everything was done electronically. I signed everything electronically. The claim was submitted to the insurance company electronically. There was no paperwork involved, and so advances are already happening. I think it's going to be exciting for you and your industry to see how far we get along, and you can imagine getting to a point where the claim can be solved 3 seconds after the accident.
Peter, anything to add to that?
I would say automotive is, yes, we're seeing a lot of activity there, everywhere from retail with virtual showrooms, self-driving cars and how the network connectivity is managed for that, in which case performance and security become ever more important. The insurance industry, now you process claims. So virtually every piece of that, even the principle of car ownership is being disrupted in that industry. So yes, I think the automotive, we are seeing a huge amount of requirements being generated by the automotive industry, and I think that's one where 5 or 10 years from now we may not even recognize what the automotive industry looks like. When Uber is simply a application for booking a self-driving car to go from point A to point B, that's a very different world. But I don't think that's too far away.
Okay, there's a lady there had her hand up.
My name is Maggie Ellis. I'm from Enterprises at London School of Economics. We coordinate a European group about e-health, and we're finding more and more that there's a misnomer about users of technology, and people think older people don't use technology. That's rubbish. We find especially the old are very active with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren on technology. What we find is the older, middle-aged people hesitate, and the younger, older people hesitate. They're the people who missed out on the Star Wars. They were too busy doing other things. And I wonder what all our businesses should have to encourage those groups, because they're the older people who we will have to care for.
Okay, interesting question. So I guess that's a question about inclusivity and accessibility and also encouraging people to use technology. Dawn?
Yeah, so I think it would probably come back to the user experience. Maybe that's not the perfect term, but we're used to what that means. I think the opportunities within healthcare particularly and just managing an aging population is going to be a massive problem for all of us in the future, and technology's got a key role to play in that. But it's a really interesting kind of example you've given there, where there's actually a kind of lost kind of generational community in the middle who aren't probably using it to the same extent as maybe the older population. But just in terms of delivering care and making that more economically viable in the future, I think there's some massive steps forward that we can make there.
I suppose also with more and more government services being digitized, that's a major obstacle potentially for some people in the community. Yeah.
Exactly. In Estonia, for example, for about 12 years, they've had open access records, and you could phone up or contact your doctor from outer Mongolia and get your records. In this country, we've been very slow to that, And now, theoretically, in England, we're supposed to have access to our GP records, but I wonder how many people in this room have. Very few, I suspect.
Well, I think
and it's ridiculous because it actually is a cost-effective system, and we should be demanding it as users just as much as business, because it will bring business to everybody in this room.
I don't think we tend to think of the national health, the national programme for IT as being a notable success story, really. But so that may be the reason, Madam. Was there another? There was a question there. Sir.
Hi, yeah, going back to the user experience part of this, I see that really the holy kind of grail of a unified communication system is it's natural to use. You don't have to teach people to use it. They can just use it, exchanging any type of the information. And historically, you would have to take your idea, you would have to change it into a one-dimensional platform of voice if you wanted to do real time. We've now got video, which everyone's very comfortable with using video. I come from the research industry and design industry where we work in 3D a lot. And so obviously you've got, this is the year of the virtual reality, Microsoft HoloLens, Oculus Rift and things. Is that something that you guys are looking at bringing into the unified communication solution so people can work in a natural way? If they've got an idea, it's just they can deliver it without having to convert it to fit the solution. The solution's more natural to them.
I suppose 3D is something we haven't been talking very much about at the event in general, and also I suppose virtual reality and immersive communications would be another theme for the future. Andrew?
Well, there are a number of aspects to that, and it's a great observation. Natural language, 3D, huge space that we're just testing the water with. We're doing an awful lot with pen and touch input. You see, we have the sort of the Lighthouse example, which is the Surface Hub, which is doing that. We are experimenting with Skype on HoloLens, which I was part of driving that. That is a real revolutionary experience. The thing that most people don't get is to see what I see, not see me. So it's participating in that. And I think as we push on those boundaries, as we push on language recognition and conversational understanding, as we push on pen and touch, and as we push on 3D, we're going to discover new scenarios and a lot of new examples. And back to the question asked by the young lady earlier, I think we have to make it so that it is applicable across all sorts of generations. You can't just go into pen and touch and design it for just the design industry. It's got to be applicable to kids, and it's got to be applicable to their parents and their parents' parents as well, if you're going to get the widespread adoption.
I'm going to push on actually because we're running short of time, and I think there's another question there. Yes.
Thank you for the panel. I have one question because we have vendors, Microsoft from software, Cisco from hardware, and a network operator. Do you foresee a day where if I have Skype on my device, can talk to someone who has WebEx? Or do we all have to have one application because that interoperability? Do you see that happening in the near future? Thank you.
Well, if you were there this morning, you'll have seen that I announced the cloud interop service that will allow, say, a Cisco room system to participate as a first-class citizen within a Skype meeting. So in so much as we are building services that allow that's kind of interop, not everything, it's really up to the vendors, but we are seeing an increasing need to bring in existing systems into the Skype experience and really connect with people wherever they are.
Yeah, and I think we're also starting to see it in the video space as well. We recently acquired a company called Acano, and much of what they provide is around interoperability. So we have a situation where regardless of which video endpoint you have, you can participate in a video conference as a single community. So I think we're already starting to see it, and I think we'll see a lot more of it.
Yeah, and we too have done both Microsoft and Cisco technology that facilitate that interop from the cloud. I think there's a little bit more to it where you're talking about point-to-point calling from, I want to dial you directly and I'd be completely independent of what the application is. Get there. I think interoperability is not going to be something we're talking about 10 years from now, would be my projection.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon and to UC EXPO. It's been a much bigger event this year and a much livelier one, I think. So Thanks very much. I hope you all enjoyed it. So thanks for coming.